Okay, joining us. Welcome, Julio, who's joining us from a very warm UK. Sure, he's
Hello, morning.
I think us in this part of the hemisphere, actually, it's a lovely day here in Sydney, but we're sort of a little bit envious of the weather over there. So before Julio starts, I'll just give a bit of a rundown in terms of how we're seeing things in architecture land. I think for me personally, it's been 6 months. But things start to slow. I think with the end of financial year, there's a couple of little slowdowns, but a lot of clients talking about fairly big things for next year or for next financial year. I haven't seen any real noise around what's happening abroad, and that's having an effect on the market over here. So we'll sort of go from there. So without further ado, Julio, who's in Sasani, Essex, is welcome to join us. And I think it's a dreadful time in the morning for you, Julio, but really appreciate you coming and being a host for us. So just to give you a little bit of feedback on Julio, he's a founder of Oliver Professional Services and the creator of practical planning for framework. Blends ISO thinking, scenario planning, and system approaches. His work empowers organizations to adapt and align through collaborative systems and informed methods. So without further ado, Julio, I'll leave over to you. If anybody wants to put any questions, just put it in the comments, and then at the end of Julio's presentation, we'll come back onto that.
And yeah, because I don't see any of you morning. Well, it's good afternoon for most people on this one. It's really early morning for me, 6 o'clock in the morning now, but that's good. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you all. As Andrew was saying, I'm a bit of a systems thinking person, so your world is very foreign to my world. However, we all have the same challenge, I think, and that challenge is how do we engage our customers and get them prepared for what they need to do, and have them design their businesses in such a way that they are resilient, for want of a better word. So this morning I'm going to talk to you about something I've been doing for about 25 years now. And I sort of distilled this whole idea of scenario planning. So if any of you know about scenario planning can be quite a big, messy project if you ever do one. So I've kind of distilled that down into a sort of a 7-step or 7-phase process. And I'm going to talk to you about that today. And the idea is I'm not going to bore you to tears with all the stuff. I'm going to try and get through it quickly. It's about a 20-minute talk. I think best thing is stick questions in the chat. And I don't see, once I press share, which I'm going to do in a minute, I don't see you guys anymore. So in a way, if you see my ear, it's because I'm looking at another screen. I do apologize for that. These are all the things that we've had to learn since COVID to look at the camera and to talk to people properly. So without further ado, I'll also get on with it, and I will share my window, and we will just double check that you can see that window. Can you see a window? You can. And if I press play, do you see a big blue screen? Can someone confirm that for me?
No, well, you can see your notes at the moment.
You can see my notes. You're kidding. Okay, that's fine. I can fix that. You see, this is the same problem we had.
We'll just read the notes, mate.
Mate, I tell you what. You should have seen what I had. The notes before said, "I'm not there. You're watching a video." Can you see it now?
We can. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So that's an interesting thing because I had to change it around when we tested it earlier. All right. Well, that's a good thing. Let's get going. Okay. I've got just under 20 minutes, and let's see if I can get it done in that time. So really, what I want to do today is I just want to introduce you to this process that I've kind of refined. And when I speak to systems thinking people, I sort of apologize in advance for butchering scenario planning. So I think you guys will appreciate the fact that I butchered it, but that's another story. Your last speaker you spoke to about starting conversations. I think this is a good tool to start conversations with your customers, and you might see where you'd be able to do that as we go along. I'll also be drinking quite a bit of water because I get quite a dry mouth, so I do apologize for that in advance. One of the other things I want to show you is using this little system of mine. you can get to a thing that all of us consultants call low-hanging fruit. In other words, customers say, well, we're in control. Well, you can identify those areas and then quiz people about that. Because often, especially executives, they believe they're in control, and when you go further down the organization, you find out that no one's in control really, or maybe they are in control. I don't know, but often people think they're in control, and there's a lot of work that can be done there, and that's easy work, that because these are things that people control. And then really the crux of everything is that what about the stuff we don't control? How do we prepare for the unknown? Now, normally what happens is we get the people start talking about things, and they say, oh, have you prepared for natural disasters? And your knee-jerk reaction says, yes, of course we have. That's what we do. We've got contingency planning, we've got disaster recovery planning, we've got business recovery planning, we've got all of this sort of stuff. And so then people dismiss the idea of doing scenarios because they've got all this stuff in place. And the thing about it is that it's not just about disasters. It's about your appetite for risk also, and also recognizing opportunity. And often opportunity is a gut feel thing. And hopefully this will show you how that taking opportunities would be more of a calculated thing than not. So you've all seen this. Insert your current disaster. Yeah, let's scare you into buying something, right? I really don't like that. So I prefer to say to people, what is your uncontrollable factor? And you'll understand this a little bit more. But essentially, when I talk about uncontrollable factors, I'm talking about the things that impact your business over which you have absolutely no control. So all those natural disasters and things that I spoke about, obviously, they're there, but there are also things that are very contextual to your business. So it's always good to have people unearth those and talk about them. So the real big question, the opening question, this is my sort of social, let's call it awkward question that I always ask people at social gatherings. I say, what difference would it make if you and your business could negotiate all the possible futures they face? And just to be clear, some people then immediately say, oh, so you're a futurist, you predict the future. And I said, no, I'm not a futurist. Futurists predict the future and they get it wrong. I said, I do scenario planning and I'm never wrong. And you'll understand that in a minute. It's quite a big claim, but I've yet to be wrong. And you'll see now that you too cannot ever be wrong about scenario planning. Right, so just quickly, the 7 phases. They're pretty random in terms of their names. The reason I liked it is because if you just look at the first numbers, at first letters, it says I can see, and I can see the future. It sounds like a really nice thing to do. So anyway, off we go. So we identify. We all do that. We've all done this. If you're a good consultant, you've always done an identification of information, and you'll understand in a minute what information I'm looking for. We've got to classify that information, so we've got to make sense of it. Most consultants do that. The next thing is articulate, telling the stories. And I have a particular matrix or a couple of matrices that help tell the stories. And these are really important. And I think that if you get that bit of it right, the rest of it really comes quite easy. The next thing you have is numbers. You could have systems next, but then my little I can see wouldn't work. But numbers, really I am kidding. What really happens is, if you've got a very finance-driven business, they do numbers first. If you've got a very data-driven business or a very creative business, they normally do systems first. So numbers, systems, we then do the implementation, and this is the normal implementation stuff. However you and or your customer does this sort of stuff, change control, change management, all that sort of stuff. And then last but not least, and I think this is probably the thing that really makes this a living strategy going forward, is that you evaluate things. You're looking at the factors that are affecting you. You're looking at the factors you're in control of. You're looking at the ones you're not in control of. And you're constantly monitoring those through measures of performance. And as those things are being monitored, you take actions to mitigate whatever scenario you're in, and you've got a living strategy. And it really, it's amazing how well it works. And it can really work from an organizational point of view, or even just right down to a small little project that you have. So basically, that's our little system. You do that and you rinse and repeat. So whilst you're evaluating, you will find that things change, and therefore you may need to re-identify things, you may need to reclassify, whatever you may need to do. If you've done a very good job up front, then you'll probably do less rinsing and repeating. If you've done a very quick job because you had to, you often do a lot more of the rinsing and repeating. All right, so what I want to do, the best way to show you how this works is to talk you through an actual set of scenarios. So the first thing in the identification stage is you've got to ask a question, and the question really is about setting context and timeframes. So you need focus. So however you get focus, I find that this question, so this is the generic question, what factors, both negative and positive, affect the successful delivery or affect whatever of the business, service, or product in the next specific time frame? So the thing that I'm going to show you, and it's one that I've used quite a lot as an example, is I was involved, just as COVID hit, I was involved with a whole bunch of consulting people in the US. And as COVID hit, the whole world kind of got locked down, but the US was kind of weird. There were people walking around filming empty hospitals and all sorts of weird things. And suddenly our customers, as the 7 consultants, our customers were just drying up. Some people went from 25 customers on a Friday to no customers on a Monday. So there was a bit of a panic. So the question we asked was, what factors, both negative and positive, affect the delivery of quality consulting services to SMEs, because that was our target market, in the next 6 months? And I mean, literally, we said the next 6 months because we didn't really know what was going to happen with COVID or anything. So we went off and we did a whole bunch of round robin emails to do this identification stage. So just to give you an idea, that's sort of some of the stuff that came out of it. I have taken the liberty of sort of sanitizing some of that to protect the innocent. But that's really what we came up with. So we had these 7 things. And then normally, this would be something that you would have done. Each person would have done their thing. And then you go and do one of these brown paper bags, or I think you guys call them Butcher's papers. We've all been there, and you put the stickies up on them and you start doing that. So we couldn't do that during COVID. So we had to jump to some technology. And we used, I think it was Miro. I'm not 100% sure now. I can't remember. But essentially what I normally do is I take the most senior person in the room. I take their stickies. I get them to take the stickies, come and put them up on the brown paper. And with no discussion, they put them up. And then the people come along and add that stuff. So I'm going to just quickly press play here and show you. This is a sped up thing of what we did. And then we can discuss what the outputs were. But essentially, people came and started adding their stuff to the boards. We started grouping things as they became obvious that there were groups. We gave the groups names. That always helps. It kind of helps summarize things. And at the end of it, we kind of came up with these sort of 6 things. Now I'll just give you a nicer slide. That's a nicer slide of them. So at this point, we were sort of going, well, yes, but it doesn't feel right. At the time, I think we were having our first set of elections with Donald Trump, and there was all sorts of stuff going on. And as you can see, our correct client profile thing was full of stuff. And so we sort of revisited these things and said, well, what can we do? So we specifically focused on the correct client profile. And we pulled out 2 more groups. So we pulled things out of the correct client profile, and we created 2 more groups of things, which were these 2, the technology and adoption one, and market response to COVID-19. At that point, we had 9 factors, and we felt, okay, these seem to be, and they are groups of factors, really. So just so that you understand, each of those little yellow stickies will have a couple of measures of performance attached to them as well. So there's quite a lot of discussion that goes in to this. I'm just giving you a very brief overview so that you can get a feel for the process. So when you've got these groups of 9 factors, at this point, some of the sort of CDO or OCD people in the business go, hang on a minute, I was talking about something like the profiles of our Microsoft, whatever, and I don't see that anymore. And I always say to try and put them at ease and say, look, you don't really lose the detail. Whatever you were talking about, it's stuck there in the technology use and knowledge, and we'll always refer back to it. We're going to have a look. If you're worried that We're talking about this technology use and knowledge in a way that is not conducive to what you meant. We can always go back and revisit it. And all of these things that you've got there will have measures of performance. Now, some of these things are slightly more generic. You know, internet safety, what do we mean by that? Well, our measures of performance will give us a very, very good idea of what we mean by that. So we really don't lose any of the detail. Now, once you've got these 9, so up to here, you've all been there, you've done that, you've done it in different ways. You know, you've looked at capabilities, you've looked at all sorts of things to get you to this kind of a point. Once you've got to this point, the next thing to do is to figure out what are the things we control and what are the things we don't control. So I've got this little matrix, and essentially I put level of control on the left, level of impact at the bottom, and we just go and look and say, well, how much control have we got over these things? And excuse me, how do they impact us? So just as an example, the consultancies, we said, well, our level of consultancy skills, we've got control over, we can train, but it has a very high impact. If we can't do the technology, or if we can't do the remote stuff, or if we can't do video conferencing, whatever, we're not in the game. So we can control that. The same goes with the type of clients we have. We can say no. We don't often say no, but we can say no to clients who don't fit our profile. For example, people who don't want to accept technology and insist that you're in their office, etc. And remember, this was early days of COVID, so there was all this COVID paranoia. There was all this, oh my God, we're going to be in restrictions for the rest of our lives. So a lot of stuff going on for us. Obviously, the US government's COVID response was going to impact us greatly, because if they just locked everyone down or didn't lock everyone down or whatever they did, we would have to be prepared. So, you know, things like, for example, if they did lock us down, we'd need technology. If they didn't lock us down, we'd need to be able to protect ourselves when we go and see customers. And so we carried on doing all of these things. I'm not going to bore you with every single one of them. And basically, we got to this point where our groups, we had a couple of things that we had control over, some things we didn't have control over. And if you look on the left-hand side, this little bit here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this little bit here, you'll notice we didn't have any groups of stuff that whether our level of control was low or high, where the level of impact was low. And if you do get stuff in this area, it's an interesting conversation. I've yet to have stuff in this area with anyone that I've worked with, but inevitably it's going to be someone's pet project that's got nothing to do with what we're trying to achieve as a company. There's some sensitive talks that I think we need to had around it, especially if the CEO or the chairman or someone's stuff is sitting in there where they have a high level of control and it's got a low level of impact. It's a difficult conversation that I don't envy the guy who has to have that conversation. So anyway, so we've got this now. So this is the first of the two matrices that I sort of use. The very first thing, which is money for jam if you're doing the work, or it's just a very good sort of temperature gauge or check of how well the client is doing, is the stuff that you're in control of. So when a client says, oh, we got it under control, well, do they have it under control? Have they got the right architecture in place? Have they got the right systems in place, et cetera, et cetera? And I think this is the world of Deloitte's, and I do apologize if you're working for Deloitte. I used to work for them, and some days I wondered what they were doing. But I think this was their world, where the low-hanging fruit was the easy stuff to do. The difficult stuff, obviously, as always, cost more and was far more risky to do. So that's the first lot of stuff. Low-hanging fruit, easy. And I like helping people there. There's a lot of stuff we can do there. There's a lot of stuff you can do there. But really what we're interested in are things that we don't know anything about. So what you can see is we've got three sets of things that had a really massive impact on us. And we weren't sure about the US election. At the time, there was a lot of arguments and stuff about whether what was going to happen was a good thing or a bad thing, etc. So basically, we chose technology adoption and COVID-19 or the COVID-19 impact, so basically how that was going to impact us. So let me show you the matrix that comes, and this is really the crux of the scenarios, really. So we do a matrix, and remember, we take those things that were at the bottom there, and so we put technology adoption and acceptance and COVID-19 impact, and we've put them on a matrix. And then basically we went around, had a discussion about what happens in each thing. So we said, well, okay, let the names come up. You name your scenarios, and you can either name them before and or after. For these purposes, we basically, I've shown you them now, but we had discussions about these things first, and we were basically saying that before COVID, which was a lot of our clients had a sort of a poor technology adoption, especially some of the sort of older board members, and there was a low COVID impact. We didn't know about COVID. So that was human touch. That was our business as usual. And business as usual was disrupted. And so suddenly the reason we were in this crisis was because we were stuck. We had no way of communicating. I mean, fax machines were, unfortunately, weren't around, they weren't around anymore. So our mode of communication was gone. We needed to figure out how to use Zoom. We needed to do all that sort of stuff. So if our clients didn't figure it out, we would be stuck in the dark ages. I don't even think the post was working properly in those days. Fortunately for us, the world stepped up to technology. I mean, Zoom, all of these guys, they stepped up, and we could do this kind of digital commute. And we learned these new tricks of looking, I always pointed to camera, and my wife says I wasn't pointed to camera, but people don't look at cameras properly. I mean, so they still don't do it now, but we had to learn as marketeers to look at a camera, smile, and do all of that stuff instead of, showing someone your ear while you're looking at a spreadsheet. And these are all new skills and things that we had to learn, and it was difficult for some people. And then as COVID eased, now bear in mind that we didn't know this COVID was going to ease. We were just busy at that time, and we were just busy seeing people going into the accepting technology. So we were helping people set up their Zooms and things like that. But then as COVID moved on, we moved into this thing that we called electric dreams, where basically there was a good technology adoption, and there was low COVID impact on us. And I mean, the irony of it is that this today that is not called electric dream, it's called hybrid work. My claim earlier, I'm always right. As you can see, this is not about predicting the future. This is about saying what's coming our way. And one of these things will always come your way, or all of them, as it happened in our case. Now, once you've got your scenarios and you've got the stories, so that the backdrop of the stories of what's going to happen, you need to start looking at that far more closely. And basically, you've got to look at every single one of your groups and see how they go in that place. Now, I do, so I'm just watching the time. I do things called interrelationship diagraphs, and essentially it's just a whole bunch of lines to see what impacts what, how they impact each other. And it's just a question. And if you want to know more about this sort of method, just drop me a line afterwards and we can talk about this. I can talk about this for hours. But essentially, there's a nice big mess. We count the arrows. We come up with things that say we've got so many in, so many out. These are the drivers. These are the outcomes. And we end up trying to figure out a way from the driver to the outcome. And that really gives us the sort of grounding to do what I call causal loop diagrams. So what the systems thinking world called causal loop diagrams. If any of you have ever been involved in them, then you'll recognize these. You'll also recognize the pluses or the sames and the opposites. And you can see from that thing, if you know about these things, you can see that there are two sort of self-reinforcing loops and one balancing loop. But I won't get into that, because that's the point of all of this, is that whatever you use, you need to look at that system in every single one of your scenarios. So that then brings me to this idea of, well, I don't want to go teaching people systems thinking. Fantastic. You don't need to. They might have balanced scorecards. So use their balanced scorecards and see how they stack up. Are they Six Sigma people? Why not use that? See how they stack up. Are they VSM people, viable systems model people, or viable system model people? I'm a VSM person, so I'd love to have a conversation with someone about these things and all of their things. Or, more per your life, What's a business capability model look like? And what does it look like everywhere? Now, I know enterprise architecture, a lot of people say, well, we design things for anything that comes our way. Well, my question would be, how robust is your thing? What's more brittle or less brittle, to coin a phrase, in some of these things? The same with business value streams. How are they working in any of these things? And how are we going to fix those things? What are the contingencies we need? What is the money we need to make sure these things will work for us under any circumstance? So just to remind you, that's the thing I've really touched. So I'm at 20 minutes up. I've really touched only on the green things that you see on the screen. The numbers come next, and then the systems engage, evaluate, and those things become more and more personal. So it's difficult to sort of demonstrate those unless you're in a company and you can show them how their budgets are working, how their systems are working. So I thank you very much for listening. If I spoke very fast, I'm sure the video replay, you can slow it down a little bit. And if you need some contact details, these are the contact details that are there for me. The best thing is just email me, julio@juliograham.com, and we can have a conversation. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I think most of you are on LinkedIn anyway in this group. So I'm going to now just press escape and stop sharing my screen. There we go, and I'll stop sharing my screen. And I'm back in the room. So, and we haven't lost too many people, Andrew.
It's always a good sign, Julio. In fact, I'll just share with you a little ditty that Julio sent me earlier on in terms of forward planning. He'd actually recorded this presentation in case it was probably a nuclear war in the UK, and Matthew George is on here, could have just played the presentation ahead of us. That's what you call planning ahead. I must say, I'm quite impressed with that. So I'm happy to open up to any questions. We had a couple of questions sent through earlier on, which I can start with and let Julio tackle those. I'm sure Matthew's got a few questions up his sleeve as well that I'm sure he can throw in. So first question I had is, what about existing projects? You mentioned that you can easily complete those.
Yeah, so I think with this system, I'm not trying to replace things. Often people come along and they say, what you're doing is mediocre, mine is better. I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm saying is, whatever the people have got going, once you get to the point where you've got 4 scenarios and you're discussing those scenarios, because people invest a lot of money in their balanced scorecard, they invest a lot of money in their budgets, they invest a lot of money in their ISO programs. Why throw those things away? Use them, and use them in the context of different scenarios. So in my case, moving from dark ages to the next one, whichever one it was, I can't remember the name of it now, and I'll tell you now, to digital commute. We had to do a whole bunch of investment in technology, but we also had to teach our customers how to invest in technology. And nothing else changed in their business. So the nice thing about the scenarios is that once you're up and running and talking about a scenario, people relate very quickly. Manufacturing people, you say to them, well, hang on, in this scenario, your supply chain is going to take longer. They will very quickly say, well, we need this, we need that, we need more storage, we need to get things sooner, we need to get things later. So yes, you really don't have to throw away existing stuff at all.
Appreciate that. Thank you. You mentioned identification meetings as one of the things that you do. How quickly or sort of how long do they generally run for? Okay, so now this was the thing about some scenario planning, the traditional one. There's quite a lot of stuff to do, and you sort of go into the reality, and then you sort of move into what if scenarios or future state scenarios and all these things, and that gets a bit messy. So if you use the system the way I do it, I've done an identification thing in about 25 minutes with 4 people, but I've also sat with a board, and it's taken us 3 weeks to do the identification because people have to go away and research things. So the more complex the question you're asking, so if it's a very focused thing, like a project thing, and you've got 2 problems and you're trying to solve it,
very quickly. You can within an hour, you can have a couple of scenarios. They might change again within 3 hours as things change, but you can have it very quickly. Whereas when you're sitting with a larger organization, you're trying to do something larger that's heavier, you may have to go and do research. So, people say, so for example, at the moment, the world has got all this tariffs, right? Now, I'm not a tariff expert. I don't know about tariffs, but I wanted to buy a computer the other day. I found out there's a 25% tariff on the bloody thing that I'm trying to buy. Now I've had to see, well, if I buy it in components, can I assemble it myself and all this sort of thing? And that's really, that's where the research of what it is you need to understand about your scenarios, that'll make things go longer. So yes, they can be done quickly, but generally you're probably going to spend a morning or 2 mornings with the executive team or whoever to get those scenarios done.
Superb, thanks there. Yeah, because I can imagine they can have a habit probably rolling a lot longer than need to. Roger, you've got your hand up. Do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Julia. It reminded me so much of so many architectural workshops I've run over the years, especially that brown paper on the wall with the 3M spray and sticking sticky notes up on. My question is, you came up with these 9 domains, I guess you could call them, domains, components, and then you've got that awesome matrix, which is impact and control.
Yes.
How did you get those domains? Right? That's
okay. So that's part. So once you've done the brown paper job, as I call it, right? Once you've got all of these factors, basically, you go through. You get the people who are involved. So this is the beauty of it. You get the people who are involved to group these things together. So there's a lot of discussion that goes on in the grouping. So, someone may go and say, well, I think my HR thing belongs to this technology. And then you say, well, how does that work? And there's a lot of that discussion. And then you get these groups and you name these groups. And that's really where it comes from. So I didn't come up with it. I tell you what I did try recently, and it didn't work too badly, is I took a whole bunch of disparate things. I trained an AI bot, and I said to it, now give me some variations of these things, because I was thinking, well, if I need to make up scenarios quickly, especially with Trump and all of these wonderful things that he does every 2 minutes, how can we do it quickly? And AI is not too bad at it. It's not great, but if you cast a keen eye on it, that'll help you. But you don't need that. You've got the people in the room who've got the expertise. So get them to group it. And the nice thing about that is that is a languaging exercise for them. So they get a common understanding. I had this for a whole company. There were 18 companies that got merged into one, right? This printing company went on a purchasing thing. They bought up all the competition and all the future competition. And then they couldn't agree on production things and all sorts of stuff. So I got them all in the same room. And these guys were like, we'll never work with those people. After we did a list of things, there were 3 things. There were 3 things that they disagreed on. And you know what? They compromised on it there and then. One guy didn't come to the meeting. When we had another meeting, he stood up and said, you guys, you stabbed me in the back. Because he hadn't gone through. So that sort of languaging exercise where people co-create a solution and co-create an understanding, that is so important. And that's why those factors, don't impose those on people. Those factors and the groupings, they must come up with that.
Those factors. So one of the things that I've used in the past is this concept of a principle, right? So you come up with a principle, and a principle, can't have any conjunctions in it. It's got to be a single statement in the present tense, active language, whatever. I noticed your concepts or whatever categories that then were grouped. Some of them just said things like technology, like they didn't even. And then you mentioned
I do
thing
exactly
about
what
the Microsoft Teams not there, and and it's like, well, it is there, but it's just being called technology.
Yes. So the idea really is, and I may have skipped over that a little bit because of my time frame, but you have to. The rules are you have to be able to measure the word. So you can't say the sun affects us. You've got to say something like the length of time the sun is shining, or the UV intensity. So that sort of thing. So I do when I do that, I do explain that. And also to be honest with you, this example, the people that were in that were not very sophisticated, so they just chucked things at me. So I've left it raw like that, because when we went and did the actual work, we said, what are we talking about? The guys were like, oh no, my computer and this and that and that. You know, so then we started, the measures of performance are really where, so if you've got terrible sort of yellow stickies, when you say to people, give me 3 measures of performance, then that's very quickly, it's, oh, the sun, it's the UV intensity, it's how much it shines or whatever, or it's how well we use technology, etc., our literacy, that sort of thing. So you're absolutely right in pointing that out. You can't just have willy-nilly stuff. Unfortunately, I might change those slides.
That was good. I guess the last question that I have, and then I'll shut up and get out of your hair. But you had, I think there were 3 down in the high impact, low control area, and you chose 2 to make your next matrix, right? You in technology and adoption and COVID-19 impacts.
Yes.
How did you? Was that just like sticky dots or some kind of consensus that these are the 2?
It was a discussion. We actually wanted to use the US election one, and the technology adoption. And what happened was that our views about who was going to win the election and what that would mean to our business got into this whole political mess. So we stopped. We stopped. We said, okay, hang on. Let's stop. There are no good stories here because we're not going to agree, because if the Democrats win and this one, so we stopped that discussion. And it did take us about an hour and a half before we realized this is not working for us. So I think choose 2, because you're not forgetting about the other things. Choose 2 things that tell good stories, really is what I would suggest. I've had ones where there's 4 or 5 things in there. You don't lose the detail, because when your scenarios are there, the US elections were still there. We still had to say, well, we've got to take this into account. And then different people had different views, but at least it didn't affect our storytelling. Because otherwise your storytelling gets biased or whatever. I mean, I think the word we used was emotional.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. And I mean, there would be nothing to stop you doing 2 matrices, right? You could do like a US election and technology adoption, and then a COVID-19 and technology adoption, like.
Well, exactly. So let's take, for example, let's say we went for the US one and technology adoption. The moment the US elections were done, the US one would be invalid, wouldn't it? It doesn't matter. Now someone has won, so we know what the results of that are. So we redo our matrix, and so now we use 2 other ones. So for example, I had one where the guys they had a US dollar exchange rate, because US dollar Zimbabwe exchange rate was this massive thing, right? Because you wake up in the morning and you've got
$3 trillion.
Exactly. Someone once said it's cheaper to use the notes as toilet paper than to actually buy toilet paper. That sort of thing. That was and this was one of their big things. And overnight, the guys decided to adopt the US dollar standard. Problem gone. So that's not a problem anymore. We're all working in US dollars now, no problem. What are the other problems? And there were a multitude for these poor people. But that's the point of it. It's a living strategy. All I always say to people is, strategy is not something that you do on a nice boozy weekend, put it in a drawer, and then when you don't like someone, you take the strategy out and beat them around the head with it, because that's not a living document. Whereas this is sort of more of a living document. It's a living thing. You can have it operationalized, you can have it strategized, you can have it even budgets, as far as that goes.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, man.
Cool. Thanks, Roger. Thanks for the questions.
Cheers, Roger. Superb. I know we can always rely on you for some good insights as well. Ms. Griffiths, you've got your hand up. I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. That was great to see. And I guess I'm more just going to add some support to your method, your methodology. I guess I've studied and practiced a couple of different scenario planning methods, which are both heavier. And so yes, everything you presented I sort of recognise, and I see it's kind of like a lighter version.
Yes.
Trying to get to you to that point. So I think, when you choose the dimensions, often you're just looking for a pair which contrast against each other nicely.
Yes.
I'd often say that what you're trying to do is come up with a scenario which is plausible. When people start talking is it possible or probable? You want to say, well, that's not the point. We're trying to stretch you to a point of just being plausible rather than unbelievable.
Yes.
And it is that sort of thinking exercise to get them out of their comfort zones, to get them, you can either say it's outside of their thinking box or,
yes.
I've seen if you sort of turn to De Bono's lateral thinking, you're trying to get lateral thinking engaged rather than sort of the linear thinking. So that's what I see these are useful for. When you started at the beginning, I think, saying, how do you approach a client who thinks they know everything? You're trying to get to them to that uncomfortable point where they go, oh yeah, hang on, if that situation occurs, maybe I don't know what I would do. And so that's, I think, the point of all this, to explore what are your options. So I'd say when you mention things are, to what degree they can control them, is a high control or low control. Often use terms like what can you control, influence, or what are you concerned about but you have no influence and control over. There's different degrees there you can play with. Because you're sort of making rethink, have I got enough capacity to deal with these unexpected events or things which my business model would be sensitive to?
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, look, it was a useful refresher for me. So thanks for that.
Thank you. And
stuff.
I've written down that word plausible because I like that word, because you're absolutely right. And this is the problem I found with some of the scenario planning that I did in my earlier days when I was sort of following the system, was that you get into this realm of just nonsensical stuff where people are just like fantasizing about what could happen. And business people, especially, and I apologize in advance if I'm picking on the wrong people, but they're finance people and they're engineers, right? They are not in the mood for, are the aliens going to land nonsense. They're in the mood for, how much is it going to cost? Is this going to work? So you've got to really get down to nuts and bolts with those people. And I find that exactly, that's why this plausibility is really good. I like that word a lot. I've written it down. It's going to be in my next presentation if you see it. And thank you for the comments. It's good to know that you could actually recognize some of the scenario planning. I haven't butchered it that much.
Yeah, look, I've done the Oxford scenario planning approach, and I've also done a more custom one at an insurance company here. And sometimes building scenarios can take, a team of 5 people 20 days. So they can be quite large, expensive exercises. So you're right. The sooner you can get somebody quickly to question the future in a shorter period of time, I found that has opened a lot of doors before.
It does. Yes.
My general sense is this is also increasingly useful in a world that has become less certain, where there are multiple external factors over which you have no control, which may impact your business model and your operating model performance, whatever. Just seems
and that
like
changes rapidly as well. That's the other thing, is the rapid change. In 20 days, if we look at Trump's little tariff game that he's been playing, in 20 days we would have got the old-fashioned way, if let's call it that way. In 20 days we would have got some scenarios out, and they would be invalid because of the assumptions we made in the beginning. I'm not saying this method, but this method is slightly faster. And so therefore, hopefully you get some scenarios out in 3 or 4 days. And even that, with some of these stupid decisions, these decisions may have been weird. But at least there's a starting point.
Yeah. I think when we presented stuff back to the business or clients, it's the litmus test is whether they just carry on as normal or think, oh, hang on, you're right, I need to make an allowance in the strategy or even change certain aspects of it.
Yeah. Or the best way, I think, is if someone can assign budget to something that they hadn't assigned budget to before, that they didn't know was coming, then you know they've bought in. And we've seen that especially on implementation projects, where we've said, look, yes, there's a 10% contingency, but I can tell you right now, we're going to need it for this, and this. That's what we're going to need it for if this happens. And when that contingency, when you need that contingency, it's not, justify yourself. You justified it back then,
Yeah.
Good.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thoughts and comments. So, no, thanks.
Superb, appreciate that. Gregory, we'll come to you in a moment. Leanne asked a question in the chat. When you're designing systems, it's helpful to identify one key constraint in your scenarios. What do you find particularly useful to identify a limiting constraint?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So I mean, there are always constraints. I've not really sort of singled out one key constraint. That's an interesting thought. I mean, the whole process of doing the scenarios is everyone will get a common understanding of what's going on. So if there's a constraint in there that is really large, and that's holding stuff back, often, I mean, that reminds me, often those things are someone's bugbear as well. You know, you'll find that the production manager has got a problem. The constraint is there's never enough budget for him to upgrade his equipment or something like that. So those things then do get surfaced. They do then get softened a little bit as they get amalgamated into things. So unless a whole group of things is a massive constraint, there's no real focus, not from my perspective. I mean, I'd be interested to sort of think about what specific things would. I mean, it wouldn't derail this process, and it would definitely surface that constraint if it was something that was real. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that definitely. I don't have a focus on constraints at all.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Feel free to put your hand up again if you have another one. Gregory, over to you. Now you're over from San Diego, aren't you? So goodness knows what time of night it is for you.
It's all right. It's almost 11 o'clock here, but it's a joy to join this group and learn from you all. So thanks for having me again. Now I really enjoyed this discussion as well. And I appreciated that this framework, I like iterative frameworks. I use some other ones for solution architecture, software architecture as well, and looking at TOGAF. But this one, I like how it's seems to be flexible on communications for like plug and play in different areas we're talking about, using the tools to the need for the audience, is what I gathered from it, like looking at from system designs or heat maps or other things to be able to approach the respective audience. Now, I have a couple of questions. When going through this iterative process in the framework, have you found there to be like a sweet spot, a number, like a sweet number, each iteration on like what you find for the number of scenarios? Is there like an average number of scenarios you would recommend to keep it to each iteration?
Well, no. So okay. Sorry. Yes.
No, sorry. I'll have another question after that.
Okay. Right. So let me answer. I think what happens is you go through the process once, and you get to the point where you've now said, okay, we understand the scenarios, the 4 scenarios. We understand what we need to do in each of them, and then we start monitoring our environment, and in particular, where we're moving in relation to those things. So if we take our COVID example, we noticed that people did start adopting technology, and we're talking about technology Luddites who were suddenly telling me about their iPad and their this and that, and I was really surprised. I mean, I was like, wow, the guy used to use his inbox as his to-do list, and now he's got more devices and he's on there and he's video conferencing. So we were very impressed by that. So once you're in the scenario and you're measuring stuff, that's where your iterations happen. If things don't change and you're stuck in one scenario, essentially you then doing the marketing or the selling or the pivoting or the closing of the business, whatever you need to do in that scenario. But if things are dynamic and they are changing and you are noticing this change through your monitoring, then your strategy is going to change. So the iteration, this is not sort of a thing we start and then we stop and we've done 6 iterations. It's a thing we start and we never stop until the 2 unknown factors are gone, or that they may stay with us forever. You know, Shell used to do things about the oil price and about the environment and things like that. And their scenarios, sort of, their timeframes were 5 years, and some of their timeframes were 20 years. People say that some of the Russian scenarios are like timeframes 100 years. So really, in 100 years, they're going to iterate that thing to death, really, aren't they? So that's the thing. I always say the ones that I've done, the ones that have been very successful and very sexy, for want of a better word, have been the ones that are on projects where there's a deadline, an implementation date. So we know everything's going to die on that date or a few days thereafter. And things change all the time. So you know, we had one of the projects where we probably had about 4 iterations of our axes changing, because as one thing went away, another thing came along. So there's no sweet spot. The sweet spot is people engaging in the monitoring and then feeding back to the system and saying, this has changed, we need to change. And you had a second question, Gregory.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I was actually very related to this. I was curious to learn from you if there's kind of like a picture of success, like you're measuring things, and I understand that oftentimes it depends on the client and what they really envision as success. Is there kind of like a typical picture of success that you might see? You know, learning how to, like, you know, we want to measure things and make sure we're hitting success. So is there something typical you might see?
Well, there are some interesting things that I've seen. So people want to measure themselves. So you'll hear about people talking about organizational maturity, for example, which is about process maturity and a few other things like that. So there's been a lot of attempts for people to try and measure themselves along that sort of scale. In terms of scenario planning, as I said earlier, when someone commits budget to something they hadn't committed budget to before as a contingency, for me, that means my scenario planning has been quite successful, because they're taking what we've done quite seriously and they understand the risks or the opportunities quite seriously. In terms of businesses in general, you know, there's always the financial indicators that people sort of throw at you, because without the money you can't do the business. But then if you look at people's strategic objectives and you look at how they achieve the things that they're saying in there. So a lot of people talk about the environment. I'll give an example. We have insurance companies here, I'm not going to mention any names. They donate money to the forest trust and this one and that one and that one. The moment they get a claim for subsidence, they cut down all the trees in the neighborhood. That's not success. You know what I mean? They failed on them, as far as I'm concerned, they failed on their environmental credentials, and they can give as much money as they want to the forestry trust or whatever. You can't buy 40 trees you've just cut down. You know what I mean? It's just like one of those things. So those measures of success are, as you were saying, they're quite contextual, and you need a yardstick. Essentially, that's really what you need. You need a yardstick, and in a sense, our scenarios are yardsticks for what's coming. You know, when you do system implementation, you don't buy the best watch you can afford. I mean, we do. We buy the best watch we can afford. But when you're doing a system, you mustn't buy the best system you can afford. You must buy the system that stacks up to your yardstick. And it may be the best, it may not be the best, but it will be the best for you. So it's that yardstick that's important. What is your yardstick? Is it your strategy? Is it some criteria? Don't know. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, great. You're welcome.
Appreciate that, Gregory. Great. So Charles has come up with a question. How about starting by using scenario? So is it socio-economic factors to identify the 4 scenarios? Well,
you can, but absolutely. And the thing is that there are a lot of people that attempt to do this. I thought, well, the way I'm going to get traction with this thing is by having a look at these socioeconomic things and doing scenarios. The problem is scenarios are quite personal to companies. They become quite contextual. And if someone grabs one of these things out of context, especially in the UK, you're in a whole heap of trouble, mate, because you're a communist or you're something else that I don't even know what the right words are. So yes, if it's relevant to what you are trying to do, absolutely. If you're trying to sort of say, well, here's this group of people and these are the things, you need to get that group of people involved. So I try and not sort of dictate what where we're going to start looking at these things. Basically, those groups come out of, I mean, I've had one where I went and did a whole bunch of factors. We didn't have a single one that we weren't in control of. And we had to like, oh my God, there's nothing here that we're not in control of. The people were so internally focused that we then had to say, well, what are your competitors doing? Oh, it doesn't matter what they do. It was a really tough, it was a tough one. I think eventually we did these scenarios on a couple of factors, and these people weren't interested in being externally focused at all. They were just so internally focused. We're in control. You've just got to do what you can do under those circumstances. You can't force people to say, oh yes, that's a factor that's no. We can deal with that. We've got enough money, or we've got enough backups, or whatever. So yes, you can start anywhere. You pick a country, there's problems in that country. You pick a group of people, there are problems in there, or there are factors that are uncontrollable. I mean, I beat up on Trump and that, but I mean, it's the same here in the UK. We've got politicians that do all sorts of things. We've got Europe's the same, Africa's the same. It's just like, it is amazing. You can find things that you can't control that will affect you day in and day out. So if you want to tell stories, that's a good way. Go and find two really controversial things and say, right, this is what I see coming, and publish those. And good luck to you, because you're gonna have the haters and the you're gonna have the haters and the lovers and the rest of them. So that's why, for me, it's a contextual thing. It's got to be contextual to the people who are trying to solve a problem. They pose the question, and we need to find an answer to that question.
I think that's great. So we're on time. Julia, I really thank you for getting up incredibly early and giving us a presentation. Yeah, I think it's something different for the architecture community, but a lot of similarities there. So really appreciate that, and I think it's resonated with most of us. We've got 2 more meetups booked in July. We're doing a workshop, and it's a joint venture with the Women in Architecture Australia group, and there's a few of them on here. So I hope you can all join us. It's more of a support than it is a female-only thing. So it'd be great if we can have you in there. And then August, we've got a data double. So Daryl Carr's here, and that's always a comedy moment for anyone who's got any insight into data. I really recommend doing it. So just thank you all for giving up your time. Really appreciate it. I'll share the slides and the video in the group if there's anything you want to catch up. And Julio's contact details will be on there if you want to reach out to him. But appreciate all your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Julia. Julia, I've sent you a LinkedIn request.
All right. Thanks, mate.
No worries. Cheers, team.